Candidates, as you all likely know, several Rhode Island towns have now voted to pull their flock camera contracts, and other towns have rejected them outright over privacy concerns. A student here wrote in the Roger Williams Law Review arguing this kind of mass tracking violates Rhode Island's own constitution. Do you think the towns that are getting rid of flock cameras made the right or wrong decision? Ms. Ahern, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, whenever there's new tools introduced, especially in the criminal law, we need to make sure that towns have the individual autonomy to make decisions that are best for them. For me personally, I would want to make sure that we know a retention policy, right, with these companies. Make sure we know exactly what they're doing with their data. Make sure that's not going to the wrong places. In particular, right now with ICE, right, concerns about people not feeling safe across Rhode Island. But you'll be hard-pressed to find any prosecutor, including me, that wouldn't want that as a tool in the toolbox when appropriately used with appropriate guardrails. And you only have to look back to last December. I live in Providence. I was so close to the Brown massacre and lived through that horrific week. And Flock contributed to help finding that. Helps solve plenty of murders across the city of Providence, and also helps find elderly individuals, older Rhode Islanders, when there's silver alerts. So we have to balance those two interests.
Okay, Mr. Solomon, same question to you. Do you think the towns that are getting rid of flock cameras are making the right or the wrong decision?
I think it's up to the cities and towns themselves to choose whether they want to have these flock cameras. So it's good. So I support the use of license plate readers. They solve crimes. The Brown University shooting, part of the reason why they caught that individual so quickly is because of the license plate readers, as well as many other crimes, including just about a month ago, a couple of weeks ago, there was a kidnapping in the city of Warwick where they were able to trace the person to Maryland due to the use of license plate cameras. Now, I will say that I was the first one to actually introduce legislation on this topic to put guardrails in place, those protections, such as putting it before the cities and towns so that it doesn't just pop up unknowingly in a city or town. Additionally, putting in rules and regulations so these cameras are properly used and that not used for nefarious purposes. So I was ahead of it as a legislator, and I do support license plate readers.
I want to zero in on when you say rules and regulations. I mean, it's a pretty broad phrase there. What did you specifically propose to rein in, as you say, the use of these flock cameras?
Right now, there is nothing regulating these flock cameras, these license plate readers. And what I am requiring is the cities and towns, the police departments, to pass rules and regulations to ensure that these cameras are used properly for the right reasons, the right purposes, and that the data only lasts a certain amount of time, 30 days, as opposed to being indefinitely. Because right now, as it stands, it's up to the company to decide whether that these are retained for a significant long period of time.
All right, real quick though, this would be under your bill, a patchwork of policies among cities and towns. Would you support having a statewide regulation possibly proposed by the Attorney General's office like Peter Nerona did with body-worn cameras?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
All right, Mr. Hoffman, are these cities and towns that are rejecting flock cameras making the right or wrong decision?
Yeah, it's a really important question that I know municipalities around the state are wrestling with. In my view, they did not make a decision in the public safety interests of the folks there. But it's an understandable decision because people are concerned that these flock-like devices, which I call them because they are not all flock, are not keeping their data that they're collecting safe, right? Safe from a police officer who may attempt to abuse their power, safe from the people at the companies who may have access to very private data. What does safety look like for this data? It means destruction. It means that after a reasonable period of time, it means that only certain individuals are able to access it at certain points in time. I have proposed a statewide regulation put in place by the Office of the Attorney General, just as we have done in body-worn cameras, and that I actually helped to institute and review. And the reason why it should be a regulation, Tim, just quickly, is that this technology is constantly changing, constantly. And so if we just put in place a law that says, well, this is what these companies have to do, the landscape is shifting too quickly. It ought to be regulatory. It ought to be reviewed annually. And in the absence of a mandatory regulation around the state, I think that we at least out of the Attorney General's office ought to be asked to provide guidance to the municipalities so that the citizens of those towns can feel safer with the flock cameras and flock-like devices in place rather than less safe.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Knight, I'll have you weigh in. The question on the table is, are these cities and towns making the right or wrong decision when they cancel these contracts?
You know, this is where being an attorney who's actually represented human beings for years and years and a legislator who's been accountable to the voters for years and years really comes into play. These cities and town councils are channeling the real fear of their voters, of their citizens, that this flock camera technology can be misused and create a surveillance state here. And who's to blame them for the fear in this time when we see what the Trump administration is doing with ICE and all kinds of stuff happening on the federal level? That said, it's true, in law enforcement or in general, trying to hold back technology is like trying to hold back the ocean. This stuff is here. It helps solve crimes. I've worked on cases where these cameras have been part of the investigation and have brought the wrongdoers to justice. So what we need is to accommodate those fears. I think we have to keep the flock system. I think we have to do it under a uniform regulation that is statewide, promulgated by the AG, backed up by the General Assembly, that provides for limits on retention, limits on the use of data, and makes it absolutely clear in no uncertain terms that the data collected by these cameras is ours. It belongs to the people. It is not to be resold. It is not to be sent down the road. It's not to be fed into an AI for somebody's profit, turning all of Rhode Islanders into profit or into raw material for some corporation out there.
All right.